Leading Britain's conversation, The Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, as we speak, Prime Minister May is there in the European Commission building meeting Jean-Claude Juncker, and you can bet your life at this time of the day, the old drinks cabinet will be rattling a fair bit. Speculation that maybe the big summit this Sunday could be postponed. We'll see how that plays out. I somehow rather doubt it. Last weekend, we saw a group I'd never heard of before called Extinction Rebellion, blocking 5 bridges over London, and they were at it again today. They blocked roads outside Lambeth Bridge, Vauxhall Bridge, they blocked Earl's Court, the Elephant and Castle, and Tower Bridge. Who are they? They're a group of people committed to bringing about economic disruption to bring the authorities to the negotiating table. Their beef is climate change, and their main demand, from what I can see, is that the UK should reduce carbon emissions to zero, net zero, by 2025. This is a new form, virtually, of economic terrorism. They want to bring about economic disruption and stop London. And tonight, I'm asking you, do you think that a group like this, whatever their convictions, whether you support their view or not, is it justified that they protest in this way? And if you think, actually, Nigel, climate change is a really big issue, we could be wiped out as a species, they're right to do this, call 0345 6060 973. Or maybe you think, do you know what, even if they've got a point, this is completely the wrong way to do it. All they would do is alienate public opinion. Text to 84850. And if you were caught up in Saturday's or this morning's protests, how did you feel about the whole thing? Let me know. Use the hashtag Farage and LBC, at LBC, and of course, Facebookers watching us live can comment there too. I have to say, I think the whole thing is outrageous. There is a Highways Act of 1980, which makes it perfectly clear that if a person without lawful authority or excuse in any way willfully obstructs the free passage along a highway, he is guilty of an offence and liable to a fine. And yet, we hear from this morning 0 arrests. I can't quite believe it. Well, somebody who was caught up in these protests at the Elephant and Castle and appeared to be right at the front of the line, and from the pictures I've seen, looked a bit red-faced and a bit hot and bothered, was comedian Jim Davidson. And Jim joins me now. Hi, Jim.
Hi, Nigel. You all right?
Yeah, I'm all right. Now, you looked a bit hot and bothered earlier, Jim.
I was hot and bothered. Well, first of all, it taken me 4 hours to drive from Hampshire, where I'm currently living with current wife, into London to see my accountants to find out that I've paid enough tax to own half of London. And then I get to the Elephant and Castle, and although we're all worried about global warming, and I feel for these people, but when it prevents a man from getting his pie and mash, then
that's too much.
All hell kicks loose from me. And how did I know, as I'm using my language, South East London language, there's a BBC TV camera poking up my nose. It was my Gordon Brown moment, Nigel.
Yes, I have heard some of that footage, and we're not going to repeat it here at a family time. So how long were you stuck there, Jim?
Well, I was stuck in the first bit for about 20 minutes. I nearly ran my battery flat, bibbing me Uta, like everyone else was.
Yep.
And then we moved forward, and they said, there's these protesters. Now, we moved forward, and as soon as I get to where I was, thinking, any minute, 2 pie and mash, liquor at Manzi's, out came these funny people, like the Corbyn fan club, with a banner, all spelt wrong. And this woman said, it said, we wong keep you long. I thought, well, what language is that? I don't quite get that. And so 7 minutes I was there. Now, that might not be long with regards to global warming, but I could see someone eating the last pie. That was my problem.
Did you get there?
Yeah, double pie and mash, and to find out I'm all over Twitter and everywhere for shouting at people. I mean, really, I got out the car, Nigel, seriously, and I went and spoke to these 2 policemen who were 12, and I said, look, they're blocking the highway. Surely there's some law to this. And they looked at me as if to say, get back in the car, Sonny. or
Yeah.
you'll be nicked. And,
What-
and normally that's what happens, so I got back in the car.
Well, Jim, I've just quoted it. The Highways Act of 1980. It looks pretty clear to me, and yet not a single arrest was made this morning. I mean, whether these people have a point or not, and there was a report out a few months ago saying we got 12 years to act, otherwise temperatures will rise and we're in for real problems. Although, to be honest, Jim, we have
Yeah, but
heard.
it was freezing today. I can't wait for temperatures to rise.
Well,
We were all shivering. Look,
They-
have a point.
they
We
chose
must
the wrong
take
morning.
care of We've got to get the plastic out the oceans, first of all, and then we've got to sort out the global warming, but not at the expense of double pie and mash and liquor.
No, absolutely. So, an unacceptable form of protest, in your view?
Well, I mean, we're all stood there, living in hooters, that's noise pollution. We're all frustrated, blood pressure going up. I look like a tomato, right? And then we're polluting the whole of the Elephant and Castle, where God was born in southeast London. All that carbon being caused with vehicles ticking over and not getting anywhere
Yeah, quite.
because of these people who were dressed like extras from, I don't know, some Mad Max film.
Well, Jim, I can't work out how they all managed to get the day off work to be there, but there we are. Maybe one of them will call in and tell us why they stopped Jim Davison. Jim, thanks ever so much for joining us. Good luck with your show tonight. Well, there's just one rather well-known person who got stuck, but, if you were stuck, let me know. But is this an acceptable form of protest? And I don't think it is. And I really do believe, looking at their manifesto, looking at their webpage where they try and raise money and get supporters, I think this language, Extinction Rebellion, will achieve its demands if we cause economic disruption, which brings the authorities to the negotiating table. This is not the language of peaceful, democratic people, and I think we should be somewhat disturbed by it. Let us go to Alex in Bury St Edmunds. Hi, Alex.
Hello, Nigel. Hello. I'm completely in support of Extinction Rebellion because I don't think anything else is going to wake people up to this. And this certainly is waking people up.
Well, I think actually, Alex, I tell you what, let's stay with me. Let's listen to Ben, who was a protester down at Vauxhall this morning, being interviewed by LBC.
Hoping to achieve getting government to actually sit down and to commit to bringing about the climate change policies for I think it's 2025.
Why cause all these problems to literally thousands of people? Why do that, Ben?
I don't see any other way than to take direct action to try to bring about a change. I've tried other ways. We've been on protests. We've been on organised protests where you just march up a given route. It doesn't seem to get anywhere.
So, Alex, all those horns bibbing wasn't in support, I can absolutely assure you, of Extinction Rebellion. It was angry people. So how does this help your cause?
Well, you're going to get angry people. You're interrupting the status quo. And most of those people blowing their horns know that they are not going to be stuck in that queue for probably more than half an hour. I mean, they might. A lot of meetings might be missed. But when you get headlines saying that 60% of life has disappeared since 1970, and change is as glacial as it is, I think it's 2040 when the government is looking to phase out diesel and petrol cars, and they patted themselves on the back for the 2040 date.
Last time I looked, Alex, the United Kingdom was responsible for about 2.2% of global
absolutely.
CO2. So shouldn't you all be going to China, really? Mind you, because you wouldn't be allowed to do that in China, would you? But isn't the real problem? Isn't the real problem, Alex?
They are making, yes.
7.4 billion people, 7.4 billion people living on the planet, and actually, it's what India and China do with CO2 emissions that really matters. We're almost irrelevant.
Of course it is, but in the way we're not irrelevant is that people look to countries like ours for the lead, and if we do nothing, the incentive for other countries who are causing, admittedly, as you say, the majority of the problems, if there's no example, then what hope is there? I think to ignore this and brush it under the carpet is it's bordering on.
But there are different points of view on this, Alex. I mean,
of course there are.
Look, in 1989.
I can't stand being in traffic jams.
Alex, hang on. Just hear me out here. In 1989, the United Nations said we had reached the tipping point. We were told in July 89 that we had a 10-year window of opportunity to solve global warming. If by 1999 radical change hadn't happened, disaster would befall us, the polar ice caps would disappear, and the thing is, Alex, it hadn't happened, has it?
I readily admit you're hearing a new thing kind of every month.
Yeah, exactly.
I readily admit that. And everyone has to adjust to the new thing they hear. It almost becomes crazy. But I've heard you yourself, Nigel, sometimes when you've been visiting a town. I think you visited Royal Tunbridge Wells in the summer. And your comment was the traffic was unbearable.
Oh, yes.
And I was chiming at the radio. I was saying, you're completely correct. And everyone is thinking this.
Well, Alex, when your population increases by 6.5 million in the course of 16 years, what do you expect?
Absolutely, and that's the fundamental problem is the population.
It is. It is.
But
we found a point of agreement, Alex, and I'm pleased about that. But
absolutely.
But do you honestly think this? I'm calling it economic terrorism because the language that is used in this document is so unpleasant and so threatening. Do you really think that this is the way to go about achieving change?
Yes, I do. I have to say, I'm completely against, violent terrorism. But I think this is something that I think it's an absolutely critical issue that goes above most things, and it's just not our habit, especially politicians and the powers that be's habit, to talk about it. But it has to be because I think our quality of life. I think Jeremy Vine recently said. He cycles from Channel 5 to
Radio 2,
BBC 2 every morning. And he says London is just a sewer of cars.
Well, Alex, look, traffic is a massive problem. I agree with that. But hey, pollution, global pollution, traffic is but one factor. Of course, it's the generation of electricity that actually is the biggest cause of CO2 in this country. Alex, we disagree, but we did it in a very civil way. I thank you for your call. 0 arrests I get by text confirms the points you made yesterday, Nigel. The police are not on our side, from Peter. And I think Jim Davison was absolutely befuddled that the police were just standing there. You see, Extinction Rebellion say that their tactics are swarming. So on their advice, you swarm onto a street, and when the police arrive, you just merge back into the general public and then regroup. But here it was happening at the Elephant and Castle in full view of the police, and nothing happened despite the 1980 Highways Act. And if this is not nipped in the bud, goodness knows where it's going to go. We just don't do things this way in, I was going to say democratic country. I'm a bit worried about our democracy too these days, but this is not the way to achieve change. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's now 6:15 and time for the news headlines with Lisa Rizzi. Jean-Claude Juncker and Theresa May have now been in their meeting for approaching 2 hours. If anything breaks from that, you will be the first to know. But I'm talking tonight about Extinction Rebellion, a new radical group who have a manifesto that clearly says to achieve their demands, they want to cause economic disruption to bring the authorities to the negotiating table. I find that language very disturbing, and whatever we may or may not think about climate change, I do not believe this is the way to behave. I have to say, given there were 0 arrests today, if this group are allowed to behave like this, they open the door for other groups to behave like this. You could finish up with Brexit protest groups, both for and against, doing all sorts of things all over the country. This is a matter of policing now, I think, as much as anything else. That's my feeling on it. I don't believe their actions are justified in any way at all. Let me know what you think. 03456060973. Alice is a new caller from Wandsworth. Welcome, Alice.
Hi, Nigel. I'd just like to say that I 100% fully support Extinction Rebellion. I would willingly be arrested for this cause. A friend of mine, Luke, brought my attention to this, and I've heard about George Monbiot, I think that's how you pronounce his name, being involved. And so I wrote a poem called Future Karma about the situation. It's been going on for about 40 to 50 years. No one's listening. Wake up.
40 to 50 years? Are you telling me that there's only been a
Prince Charles
problem?
has been banging on about this.
I know, and he's been
talking about this for decades.
Yes, and he's been wrong several times in his predictions, hasn't he?
Water levels are rising. Watch Before the Flood by Leonardo DiCaprio. Listen to scientists. Whatever your views, it's imminent. Look at the floods that occurred here in this country. So, it doesn't matter about the 2.2%. We are, if people say, the fifth, richest country, and we are a superpower that people listen to. Lead by example. Plastic bags are illegal in a country in Africa. That more change needs to occur. I can't express.
Okay, Alice,
how important this is.
I tell you what, I take a stand back sceptical view of this. I've always been worried about pollution. I did once vote for the Green Party myself. I'm not utterly convinced that CO2 is the real evil that it's painted out to be. There are many other concerns I've got. But aside from that, Alice, you clearly feel this is true, it's happening, and we've got to act. And I respect that opinion.
Can I just say something really quickly? The Malibu fires. If your house had just burnt down due to climate change, or your house had just been flooded due to climate change, you would wake up and you would be like, hang on a sec, this is serious.
Alice, you
because
cannot.
It hasn't affected
Alice,
you personally.
Alice, you cannot
You're
say.
Like going into work and it's all okay.
You cannot say that one standalone disastrous event is directly a result.
It's linked, Nigel.
Well,
it's
yes,
linked.
but we've had
we've
had disastrous weather events going on for many hundreds of thousands of years.
No,
Alice, let me move to a different point. And this is the really important. And we could debate CO2 for an hour, but I'm not. What I'm talking about, because I do think this is relevant, given that actually passions in this country are running high on other issues too. And here's my concern, Alice. My concern is if Extinction Rebellion are allowed to willfully break the Highways Act of 1990 without being stopped and arrested by the police, as I believe they should be. Arrest me. Then I think you'll see all sorts of other people effectively taking the law into their own hands.
Look, people don't want to be civilly unrest. I'm a very peaceful person. I haven't joined the protest because I am peaceful. But people
good.
aren't
I'm pleased to hear
Do you
that.
think, I jump on a horse, jump on a bike, walk. We need, Prince Charles has talked about solutions, and not only Prince Charles, Leonardo DiCaprio. I can name George Monbiot. the list is endless. Sir David Attenborough. People are talking about it. We need to wake up as a country. We need to. Brexit isn't the only problem at the moment.
But Alice, the point is this: the things that Extinction Rebellion are talking about. They're saying the government must tell the truth. We need to have a bigger debate. I mean, as we speak, Sir David Attenborough is heading off to a big United Nations meeting. It's not as if we're not having a debate. But let me just, I'll tell you what, Alice, stay with me a minute.
Okay.
Have a listen to the co-founder of Extinction Rebellion, Roger Hallam, speaking to Nick Ferrari on Tuesday morning this week. And he kept on telling Nick about the problems, but didn't appear to have any solutions.
We want to raise the issue.
No, I've got that. No, we're all aware of that. That's why we're shutting bridges. That's raised. You've got it. We're there. No, don't worry. It's raised. Hello, it's raised. There it is, high and mighty and raised. Now we need the solution.
I don't think that's the issue at the moment. I don't think.
So you just want to disrupt, you and your colleagues just want to disrupt traffic, make it very difficult for Londoners to possibly go about their business, visit people, go and see people in hospital, go and do some early Christmas shopping, whatever they want to do. That's great, because you want to raise the point, and then when they cried in frustration, well, what do you want to do? You say, I don't know. I've got no ideas, really. I just want to stop you getting across a bridge. How puerile you and your colleagues are.
If you won't allow me to talk to your
go ahead. Give me a solution. Give me a solution.
Then, no, I'm going to put the phone down because you've interrupted me about 10 times.
And because you haven't got a clue. I'll put the phone down ahead of you, beating you. Bad luck.
Alice, all right, that was a full-on aggressive interview between Nick Ferrari and Roger Hallam, the co-founder of... But here's the point. Here's the point.
Yeah, I'm listening.
Do Extinction Rebellion have any sensible suggestions to make, or are they just going to, in a sort of anarchistic way, attempt to terrorise, people working in London?
I think that's a brilliant point, and actually, I think that's a brilliant point, because people do need to get to work on time. The economy does need to run, and people do need to get to their pie and mash if need be, or vegan meals, whatever it is. But the solutions are actually there. There are solutions, and there are ways that the people over aforementioned have been talking about.
But why, Alice, do these people, Extinction Rebellion, not seem to
Because they
offer
feel that
any?
the government and people in general aren't listening. They're not waking up. They're not realising how urgent. I'm not saying green. I'm not saying amber. I'm saying red light. It's urgent. It's imminent.
All right. Well, I think, Alice, what they'll do with this is turn people off. Alice, thank you for your call. Thanks for the chat. I've got to move on. I'm in support of the protests, I get. We have to listen to the issue and change. Well, I tell you what, if you think... I mean, let's just close Parliament down. Let's do the whole thing by violent protest. And, I mean, that almost is the logic of this argument. It doesn't make sense, folks. Let's go to Daniel, a new caller from Hendon. Hi, Daniel.
Good evening, Nigel. Lovely to talk to you.
Good to talk to you.
I just wanted to say, I agree totally with what you said.
Oh, thank goodness for that. I thought I was on my own
here.
here.
Do you really think this would be allowed in any other European country?
Well,
absolutely not.
Well, Daniel,
you saw
actually...
what happened on Saturday. I was watching the pictures on French TV.
Yeah.
The French police took no prisoners, as it were.
Yeah.
They did not allow roads to be shut. And what do we get here with the English police? They just sit by and just stand by and let people do whatever they want. And do you know what the other event was this week? Oh, fantastic mayor got rid of the water cannons, which would have been absolutely ideal.
Well, now I tell you what, Daniel. It was really cold this morning with a good easterly wind blowing.
Yeah.
A burst of the water cannons, they wouldn't have been there long, would they?
They would have been gone in 10 seconds, Nigel. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I can assure you, this is going to cost lives. Ambulances are not going to get to their destinations. Fire engines are not going to get to fires.
Yeah.
It is an absolute disgrace. And the police have got to crack down, otherwise this will get completely out of control.
But, Daniel, I had Alice on the phone a moment ago who struck me as being a very sincere person who sort of supported the aims of Extinction Rebellion, but the more she heard about it, the less she liked the organisation. But you see, there are people out there, Daniel, like Alice, who think this is a red flashing emergency that we face.
But as you say, we've been talking about this for years. I mean, climate change, well, we can all, debate that. It's a science. It's, people have some views on it one way, one views of the other. She mentioned the American fires. That is more to do with building properties in woodlands.
And forests.
And forests, absolutely.
And there are some forest management issues there too, I think.
Correct, as Donald has pointed out.
Yeah. Daniel, thanks very much indeed for your call. Well, Daniel, taking the other view, the water cannons shouldn't have been sold, they should have been used. I have to say, whatever methods we use, if the police and the authorities allow these people to continue like this, it is, forget your red lights, a green light to every protest group in the country. Forget democracy. You don't need to do that. Go out and bring your town or city to a standstill. The police won't arrest you. It'll all be fine, and then you can start to negotiate. This is not the way forwards, folks. It really isn't. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's 6:30 in time for the news with Lisa Aziz. The extremist climate group Extinction Rebellion were back on the streets of London today, having blocked bridges over the course of the weekend. Their aims are very clear. They want to cause economic disruption to bring the authorities to the negotiating table. And they've even got ideas of actually setting up their own parliaments. They want to set up a National Citizens' Assembly to oversee the changes that are needed as part of creating a democracy fit for purpose. Goodness knows how these people get appointed. I don't see the word elected mentioned absolutely anywhere. Anyway, they're a very, very extreme group, and I'm asking you whether you think their behaviour is justified, because I certainly don't. And meanwhile, the Brexit drama plays out. No news yet from the meeting between Mrs May and Mr Juncker. They'll be downwind of a couple by now, I would have thought, knowing Mr Juncker. And interesting, the 585-page withdrawal agreement will barely be discussed tonight because Mrs May is happy with it. Mr Barnier said this week that us staying in the customs union wasn't his suggestion, it was the Prime Minister's suggestion. And yet she's the one that told us again and again and again we are leaving the customs union, including in her own manifesto. And then she later on said this was the deal she'd always wanted. Has she been lying to us from day one? Has this whole thing been a great Brexit deception? I don't like to think so, but it is beginning to look a little bit like that. Oh, and she's also said the great thing about the document is that we will be ending free movement. Well, if you go through the document, there are half a dozen mentions of free movement, but only the existing rules that stay in place for the entire transition period, which of course could be unlimited because she signed up to the concept we can't leave it without their agreement. There isn't one word about taking back control of our borders or ending free movement in this withdrawal agreement, and yet that's the impression she's tried to give the country. I repeat, she's the most duplicitous Prime Minister I've seen in my lifetime. Now, of course, they'll say, yeah, but Nigel, we'll sort all that out with the deal we'll negotiate over the course of the next few years. And what she's going to be talking about tonight with Mr Juncker is a political declaration. It'll be 10, 20 pages long, something like that by the time they finish on Sunday. And that will point some way forwards. It won't be legally binding. Frankly, you may as well use it to light the fire. But that's what the negotiation tonight's about. And the Spanish are kicking up over Gibraltar, and the French are kicking up over fish. Well, after all, if you had 90% of the Western Channel haddock quota and the Brits only had 10, you wouldn't want to give too much of that away, now would you? But don't worry, Theresa won't fight too hard on fisheries or on anything else. But this idea, as I say, that free movement is going to end, that she's been parroting all week, absolutely double-check that document today. It simply isn't true, which makes me pretty angry. But let's get back to another subject that makes me pretty angry, and that is the police standing by and letting people block the Elephant and Castle and Vauxhall Bridge and Earl's Court and many important parts of London this morning. And the point's been made, it isn't just economic disruption, it actually slows up ambulances, fire engines and everything else. Is their action justified? I don't think so. What does Pete, a new caller in Exeter, think? Good evening, Pete.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you doing?
Well, I'm doing all right, but I tell you what, if we don't get a grip of this, Pete, we will see all sorts of anarchic protests taking place all over our country.
I agree. It's absolutely ridiculous. I think these guys, Extinction Rebellion.
Yep.
It's a bit of a silly name to start with. I don't. You know what's being extinct here. We're not going to be extinct for a very long time.
Well, the argument, Pete, the argument is that lots of species have disappeared since 1970, and the bigger, longer argument is that mankind will be itself extinct unless we take radical action and take it now.
Well, if they really, really want to do anything, they're a new movement, a new group, then they should put their heads together, sit down and think, right, what other ways can we approach this, subject matter, and, think of action points, something that you can do to actually make a difference. Think of ideas, new energy-saving
Pete, did you hear that clip with Nick Ferrari, of one of their co-founders? Hadn't got a single idea, a single positive thing to say, had he?
No, and the chap said that, I've done protests, I've done organised protests, and they've just done this protest here, and he said nothing's worked. Well, that's obviously not working for you, is it? It causes all this disruption, and it doesn't just affect, the main people, the main areas of London, because you have deliveries and things like that from outside of that city, and, customers get upset and things like that. It has a much wider... a much broader spectrum of effects on people's lives and things like that.
I can't work out, Pete. I mean, how did they all get the day off work to go out and protest?
Yeah, I wish I could, mate. It would be lovely to, but I guess I would have stayed in because it's freezing out there.
I have to say, Pete, I wonder how many of them work. But hey, maybe that's me just being... Yeah. Maybe I'm stereotyping and making a terrible mistake.
No,
Pete,
I don't think so at all. I just wanted to touch on the police side of it as well, because as everybody knows, there's been a huge amount of crime in London, especially with the stabbings, and the police are struggling to gain control of that. If they cannot control a small group of protesters blocking the street, then something seriously needs to be done there. There's either training that needs to be done to ensure that...
They did on Saturday On Saturday, they arrested 84 people, but today, Pete, they arrested no one, and that's a very bad signal. Pete, I'm going to love you and leave you. Thank you. And, of course, the idea is that we've all got to wake up to what's going on, and Chris on Facebook says, who isn't aware, ? It's been shouted at us for years, and it has. Ever since the late 1980s, this has been shouted at us. And we actually reached a total consensus in British politics where, the Labour, Lib Dems and Conservatives were all putting climate change very high up in their manifestos in terms of what they would do. It isn't as if we haven't noticed. And Jan says, I'm afraid we can't go back to caveman days. Life is what it is now. We cannot go backwards. Impossible. No, Jan, but we can cut emissions and we can cut pollution, and there are great things that we can do if we're prepared to do it. And technology, of course, is one of those solutions. Beth is a new caller from Ealing. Beth, good evening.
Good evening. I had a point I wanted to make, and then I had a question for you.
Make your point then, Beth.
So the point is what you mentioned earlier about China being a massive emitter. And the point I wanted to make was actually that we have outsourced a lot of our carbon emissions to them by the amount of goods that they produce that then get shipped here. So I think, I don't know the proportion, but an amount of their emissions are actually things that we're benefiting from. That was the first point I wanted to make.
Beth, it's a very good point. I remember a handful of years ago when the steel plant in Redcar closed, and that was very sad for that town and a couple of thousand jobs lost. But it was good in one way for the government because it showed that we actually were reducing our CO2 emissions. And what happened was that steel then got manufactured in India under lower environmental standards and then shipped back to this country. So the net effect of it actually was more CO2. So when you hear arguments about things being made locally and not shipped all over the world, in terms of CO2, it does have some validity. And you wanted to ask me a question.
I did. I was interested to know if climate change, I don't know if you agree with this, but in my view, climate change is exponentially more important than Brexit. And the impression I've got from you in the past is that I don't know if you would support it, but you'd certainly anticipate there would be incredible amounts of violence, protest, etc., if, say, Brexit was stopped.
No, I've actually... No, Beth.
So I wanted to ask
No, Beth, I've said I don't think that will happen. I've been quite specific about this. The people saying that there could be violent protest, I mean, the Mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham, and others have said that if people are made to vote again, there could be violent protest. I've kind of said, Beth, well, we're not really like that in this country. But what worries me is if this form of anarchy is allowed to happen in London unpunished, all sorts of other groups could start behaving this way.
Would you accept this level of or this type of protest from people that wanted Brexit to go ahead?
Beth, I think I've explained myself on that. Nice try. Thank you very much indeed. Going to Guildford to speak to David. David, good evening.
Oh, hi, Nigel. I've spoken to you before and respect your views. You're very well informed on Brexit, agree with you or not, but I think that previous lady stole some of my thunder because this makes Brexit look like a walk in the park. But I do agree in the sense that it's not the way to win the neutrals in an argument over, because not everyone's convinced of climate change.
Of course they're not.
I detected a certain amount of scepticism with yourself, but then you start talking about technology will solve the problem. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. That is what will happen.
Oh, Dave, I have been in many ways an environmentalist all my life. You know, I've been a member of all sorts of countryside organisations and you know, I do care about the environment hugely. I just really worry that we've obsessed on CO2 and forgotten about so many other things that are happening. And I'm not
gas, you know, and then some people deny the effects of carbon itself. And anyone who does, I point them in the direction of a guy called Professor Harry Croso. Wasn't a climate scientist, so you could argue he's not biased and doesn't have grants that are at his disposal. He won the Nobel Prize for discovering a new form of carbon, and he as an advocate, always he says CO2 causes climate change. So for someone as expert as him...
David, we can find experts on both sides of this. I mean, I've met one of the world's leading geologists, and he will tell me, actually, what man does is irrelevant compared to what volcanoes deep under the Pacific Ocean do every year in terms of whether they're active or not. So we can look at this lots of ways. David, I'm going to have to go. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's 6:46 and time for the news headlines with Lisa Aziz. I think the behaviour of Extinction Rebellion in blocking the roads this morning, again, having done it last Saturday, is totally unacceptable, and we should do something about it. Otherwise, all sorts of protest groups will start behaving like this. Mark in Chessington says by text, Nigel, for what it's worth, a lot of rank-and-file police officers feel that they should have been all arrested too. It's the management that's the problem. And I'll remind people, whilst there were 84 on Saturday, not a single arrest today. I find that absolutely unbelievable. It's almost like, come on down, do what you like, we don't care. If you want to close London down, you can. Speaking of elephants, I get by Twitter, of course, we were talking earlier with Jim Davison about the elephant at Castle, which is where he was stuck. No one talks about the elephant in the room. It's the P word. The cause of almost all these problems is population. Well, absolutely, and there was an Optimum Population Trust, who were advising many years ago that restricting population was the thing politicians should be trying to do, but that became a very unpopular thing to talk about, so everyone decided just to simply drop it because it was too difficult. Let's go to Uxbridge and speak to Alex, who's a new caller to the show. Good evening, Alex.
Good evening, how you doing?
I'm all right, but I don't like the way these people are behaving, Alex.
No, nor do I. I work over at Heathrow, and I've seen very similar things happen to us. Two things spring to mind. Black Lives Matter. They decided to block the M4 spur road coming into Heathrow on one occasion.
I remember that.
Causing absolute carnage. They did get arrested after, I think it took a couple of 2-3 hours to actually get them moved off the roads. And they got slapped down with poxy little fines.
Yeah.
Then you had the climate change ones who decided to abandon and block the access tunnel going to Heathrow with a van. I don't recall the fallout from that, what happened. And then they just have these random ones where they come into terminal buildings and cause absolute chaos.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's happened. I can't remember the ones, but they came to the terminal building dressed as polar bears once. And the police turned up, airport security turned up, and they gave them a safe space to carry out their protest while they're playing music and jumping around and running trolleys.
Do you feel racked with guilt that you work in the CO2 industry?
Not really, no.
Sorry, I'm being horrible to you.
No, not at all. I'm quite happy. I'm not going to say what I work for, but we're quite eco-conscious. We do have lots of environmental policies. We don't like wasting paper. Big investment in modernising our fleet, so we do run a modern fleet. But these protests, they are utterly selfish. They don't do anything constructive, really. Yes, it raises awareness, but the amount of lives they disrupt, and people missing flights, it's horrible. No, there's people that miss flights that are flying halfway around the world to go see a dying relative.
Yeah, no. Alex, I agree. It's unacceptable. Thank you. And we're getting a little bit of news from Brussels that good progress apparently has been made in these talks. We always hear that, don't we? I can assume, given that it's Brussels and the EU themselves saying good progress has been made, she's probably given away another 10 billion. Who knows? We will find out all in good time. Nigel, can you ask these clowns how I'm supposed to travel 30 miles up the road to central London with all my tools, spares and ladders? I don't think the South Eastern Rail would like that too much. Well, not during the rush hour, they wouldn't. No, you're right. I'm going. And again, it's a bank of new callers. Ashley is a brand new caller from Kensington. Good evening, Ashley.
Hi, Nigel. How's it going? Great to speak to you.
Well, good to speak to you, and you're welcome. Now,
wonderful. It's a privilege.
Now, Ashley, I mean, the lights are flashing red. We've got 12 years to save the planet, although we have heard that before. We've got 12 years to save the planet. Something has to be done. So maybe, just maybe...
Well, you're not going to do that by closing your bridge, are you?
Well, I think that's probably a perfectly fair point, although maybe they should go to China and do it there.
I know, that's it. Everyone else is doing bits and pieces around the world, and I think we're doing a brilliant job. Personally, I think everything that's going on in London when it comes to climate change, I think it's the wrong way to go about it. Hyde Park, have the protest there. Perfect. Brilliant. But stand in front of an ambulance when someone may be having a heart attack, not a way to do it.
No.
London has to carry on.
And
it's an immature behaviour, and that is where London needs to change.
I think it's more. I think it's more serious, actually. I mean, you use the word immature, but I'll read this to you again. Extinction Rebellion will achieve its demands if we cause economic disruption, which brings the authorities to the negotiating table. I mean, this is more like the language of terrorists.
Correct. I couldn't agree more. I think it's absolutely inappropriate. It's immature behaviour, irresponsible, and quite frankly, it does jeopardise the security of London.
So should they be...
Let alone closing bridges in our situation.
So today,
it should not be done.
0 arrests today. What do you make of that?
Outrageous. I could walk down the road and walk in front of an ambulance, say I'm not moving, and before I know it, I'm looking at a manslaughter charge.
Yeah.
But yet, close a bridge off, cause a protest about climate change and protecting animals and human beings. Yeah, no problem at all. Let it carry on.
Yeah.
That seems to be the way we're acting at the moment.
Well,
Our ethics are wrong.
We can't allow it. Ashley, thank you very much indeed. I'd have more respect for these people if they showed the same amount of concern for our precious countryside, which is being destroyed at an alarming rate, says Tony in Church Langley. Tony, I do agree with that. Very worried about what the future, particularly for Greenbelt, is with our population going in the direction that it is. Toby is a new caller from Kensington. Hi, Toby.
Hi, Nigel. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. So, protest on the streets, police doing virtually nothing. What does that mean, Toby?
I mean, to me, these protesters are protesting the completely wrong place. Getting the little man who just needs to go to work every day and doesn't want this in their life.
Yeah.
It's not like no one cares about this in the first place. I don't see anyone protesting outside, for example, the merger of Monsanto and Bayer, who are the largest petrochemical-based companies in the world that pretty much produce all of our food for us. And it's going all over the countryside, all our topsoil disappears, and then the council spend £2 million a mile dredging the river.
So you are clearly, Toby, a concerned environmentalist.
Yes.
But you wouldn't join protests or groups like Extinction Rebellion?
No, absolutely not. I think they're wasting people's time, wasting their own time and drawing attention away from the real matters where it's needed. OK, Toby, thank you. Time for one last caller, Steve from Surbiton. Good evening, Steve.
Good evening, Nigel. I absolutely fully support their right to protest, freedom of speech. It is the law of the land. However, with rights come responsibilities. If you want to be free to protest, well, I want to be free to go about my business. So, and I accept that with that freedom, if my rights to go where I want and do what I want interfere with your rights, I'm at fault. Because we've all got rights to freedom. That's why there is certain limitations.
Rights go in both directions. Steve?
Exactly, yeah. So if they're going to impede my right to go about my lawful business, that's exactly where the police are oath sworn to step in and act in our interest.
Steve, I couldn't agree more. It's a good point to end on. It's one that I agree with. The Highways Act 1980 is clear. What are we doing? If we allow these people to behave like this, there'll be all sorts of protest groups. It will be anarchy. We've got to do something about it. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show. I'll be back tomorrow.